Welcome to this session. My name is Alejandro Gutierrez, and it's a pleasure to be here to discuss how analytics can be used for decision-making in a complex and dynamic world. To start, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Alejandro Gutierrez. I'm a faculty lecturer at the McGill School of Continuing Studies. I'm involved in different programs related to data analysis, data science, complex systems. In particular, I'm the academic program coordinator for 2 graduate certificates, one in data analysis for complex systems and one in data-driven decision-making. And well, today's topics are going to be connected to some of the courses that I teach at these programs and some areas that I research as part of my academic work. Well, to start, let me bring a topic that creates some strong feelings every time that someone mentions it, and it's the COVID pandemic as a event that changed the way companies operate, the way we live our life, as a way that shows how events that occur in places far from where we live can have impacts in basically all around the world. And it's difficult to predict, and it's difficult to know what to do when an event such as COVID-19 happens. And I think although still a traumatic event, we can learn a lot from how to treat these kinds of uncertain scenarios or uncertain events for companies and for our lives. So definitely, although traumatic, we can still use it for good. And we will see a couple of examples of the use of some of the techniques that we will discuss to understand how to act, to understand how to design policies to try to minimize the damage. Now, bringing this idea of dynamic and complex things that are happening every day, I have 3 more examples that I think are poster childs of some of the challenges that we are facing right now. If you live in Quebec or in Canada, well, in all around the world, jobs are at risk because of the advance in certain AI technologies like ChatGPT and similar kinds of technologies that is putting pressure on certain kinds of jobs, maybe eliminating some activities, maybe redefining what people do. And that's also creating a lot of uncertainty, a lot of new changes that we will have to face in the near future. And an example of that are, for example, jobs related to programming or software development. Right now, a few years back, it was a very in-demand area. Right now, there are not a lot of positions. A lot of people are looking for jobs. So definitely that tells us that more changes are coming. And this again adds to the dynamic characteristics of today's job market. What was safe 2 years ago, maybe it's not anymore. And how can we adapt, and how can we make the best decision for ourselves or for our organizations? So just in Quebec, according to a study, 800,000 jobs might be at risk because of these technologies. Now, adding more to this already complex scenario, we have changes in policy or politics, and we have as a poster child, I think, the changes brought by Trump in terms of the relationship between Canada and the US are also introduce a huge amount of uncertainty into planning for companies, planning for business decisions. And at the personal level, well, what is going to be the cost, the rising cost because of these trade wars that might start happening? And even more recent, although this does not apply to Canada, but it's another example of how things can change in a couple of seconds. In Portugal and Spain recently, last week, uh, there was a huge blackout that they don't know why it occurred. It could be because of temperature changes. It could be because of a potential cyber attack. It could be for a technical problem. Well, the result was that the country was in dark for several hours, complicating things for anything that requires electricity, elevators, hospitals, you name it. So basically, something we take for granted and can change in a couple of seconds, putting pressure on multiple systems, on multiple organizations. This is, again, just to show you some ideas of why we live in a complicated and dynamic world. I'm sure that you feel that in your jobs, in your life. Well, today's session is not about discussing or mourning over them, but more how can we be proactive in the use of analytics in data to make better decisions for us and our organizations. And just to give you an idea of where these changes and problems might be coming from, and this is called some of the main criteria we include in what is called a pestle pestle before, and adding the last E, analysis. Basically, it's just identifying these potential factors that are external to our businesses, our organizations, and our life, but could have an effect on anything we do. And we have politics, and we were saying, as I mentioned, Trump is definitely a factor there. Economics, well, a few years ago, 5 years ago, we had interest rates that were around 2%, now are between 4 to 5%. Well, what are the implications of that? How can and what could happen in the near future with everything that is going on? Society, in terms of how customers are changing, how customers are reacting to these changes in politics, in economics. Well, how can we take that into account for our planning? Technology, I already mentioned, definitely AI as a disruptor. What are the implications for our businesses? How can we use it in a way where we make our employees comfortable using it, and at the same time does not create, we don't open too many potential risks in terms of the use of the technology, in the use of the of potential cyber attacks and other factors because of the use of AI. Environment, definitely the climate is changing, and for certain kinds of businesses that could have also very strong effects on their planning they're making in terms of for example, if you work in agriculture, well, what would be the potential yields of production because of changes in the environment? What will happen if, for example, you have snow in, let's say, ends of May, in terms of the effect in the production? So again, lots of changes, lots of factors that now companies need to take into account to make better decisions coming from multiple sources. And well, how can we use analytics to guide or to provide us with some insights on what paths, what scenarios can happen? And just to finalize this slide, legal aspects and ethical aspects could also play a role and affect organizations. So lots of change coming from multiple sources. To make things worse, we are operating in complex systems that are composed of multiple elements that are interconnected and interact with each other. And sometimes those interconnections, those interactions are not evident and do not behave in a linear way. I will tell you more about this linear concept in a minute, but basically it refers to this idea that sometimes small changes in some parts of the system have large effects in others. So how can we try to understand the connections, the effects in terms of the changes? How can we predict what could happen when we have so many pieces going on, so many parts that could see potential effects? So I know that this doesn't, it's not a nice picture. It does open the room for a lot of concerns, for a lot of fear. But the good thing is that there are techniques that allows us to understand these systems and to be able to predict potential scenarios that could occur, and therefore we can plan for those scenarios and be better prepared. So in terms of why we see so much complexity and why we feel that sometimes things start to behave in unexpected ways, why we have a hard time predicting the changes or the effects of some of the changes. Well, it's because there are multiple sources of complexity that are playing in these complex systems that we live in. And some of these sources or sources of complexity come from the interconnections of these different elements. For example, Canada and the US, well, we have business agreements, trade agreements, companies operate across borders. Well, everything or many of the elements in both economies are intertwined, they are connected with each other. So an effect on part of the network will likely have some results or some effects in other parts of these networks. And now it's not just that they are connected, but they are also affect each other in feedback loops or there is an interconnection or interrelationship where when one element affects the other, that other element that was affected responds and affects back the originator or the initial element that started the change. So it's not that these elements are just connected, they interact with each other in this way. So sometimes changes that we believe are gonna, for example, in the case of the Canadian and the US relationship, well, now Canada is planning to put tariffs on US goods. So it's not just the effect of the tariff that the US put, but the feedback effect of us putting tariffs on them and then maybe them reacting to our tariffs. And that is a cycle that can continue for a long time. So how can we understand that kind of feedback effect, feedback loop in the case of the commerce between these two countries, or in the context of projects and other kinds of industries and environments. So on top of that, there are effects that do not show right away. For example, all the changes that the US is introducing into their health system, into their political system, we might see some effects like the firing of people right now, but what is the effect of those people not developing the projects that they were involved, not doing the work that they will initially were tasked to do? Well, seeing those effects after the person was fired and then didn't develop the project, well, it's gonna take time. So predicting the effect when the connection between action and result is not close in time, well, that is also another source of complexity. We don't have the capacity to see or predict in detail these very disconnected events in time. It's difficult for us as humans. It's difficult for us to take all this complexity into our planning. It doesn't come naturally. To add on top of these sources of complexity, we have uncertainty. We don't know what is going to be the final tariff, for example, that we might face. We don't know when they're going to be in place. We don't know a lot of elements that could affect us. So that again complicates the prediction and the planning. And nonlinearities, sometimes changes in one part of the network have effects that we didn't see in terms of the magnitude. So sometimes the small changes generate large effects or large consequences in other parts of the network. Maybe a small tariff will have a very strong effect in certain kinds of industries, even if it's a 5% tariff, a 10% tariff. Well, for certain parts of the industries, could be that just small tariff breaks the production system and they cannot operate in the same way as before. For example, in the automobile industry, well, because of the way that products are developed and because of the number of times the cars cross the border between the US, Canada, and Mexico, well, even a small tariff, when you compound the effect of these multiple crossings, it could have a huge effect in the final product. So definitely, that's an example of a nonlinearity that occur within these systems. And again, these systems are not only apply not only to trade or tariffs. We can see these kinds of complexity sources all across organizations. No matter if you are a project manager, if you work for a non-for-profit, these sources of complexity are really appear across domains and across industries. And it's a show or an example of the times we live in. And these are some of the reasons why sometimes it's so difficult to make decisions, because we have so many elements interconnected, uh, affecting each other, with time delays to see the effects, with uncertain elements that it can paralyze us, and it can make predicting and decision making very complex. So what are some, before I jump into some of the solutions, I would like to hear from you what decisions or challenges are keeping you awake at night in your business and your personal life, just to have an idea of what are the challenges that you see affecting your business or your life in major ways. And you can put that in the chat. This is just to know what are the things that are concerning to you, so we can see if some of those elements can be analyzed using the frameworks that we will discuss today. And I see already a few, definitely jobless. I think this goes back to my point about AI taking more jobs, even jobs that before were considered secure. So how can we predict what could be the effects in certain jobs, in certain roles because of AI and other factors like geopolitics? I see Pauline mentioning geopolitics. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Paran. Job searches, again, I think goes back to positions being replaced by AI, the amount of data that now we have to deal with. Thank you, Ben. I see more more answers. Workplace management in regard to office occupancy. That's an interesting example of some challenges that we need to plan and predict. So how can we take into account these elements that I'm telling you: uncertainty, interconnections, nonlinearities, delays, to come up with something that will allow us to analyze different scenarios, different policies, different changes, so we can feel comfortable with our decision. I see the relationship between the US and Canada. I see uncertainty definitely appears in the list. So how can we deal when we don't know parts of the problem? So, well, luckily there are some techniques that allows us to use uncertainty as part of the analysis process and see what are the most probable scenarios, what are the most likely situations or results, and we can use those to plan for the most probable or likely scenario. I see. Excellent. So lots of areas of concern, which is good because then it means that we can start looking for places where we can use the techniques that I will show you today. Okay. So I won't review all of them, but I do appreciate your comments. That's a great start. Let's keep those concerns in the back of our head as we explore the different techniques that I'm going to present today. So how can we use analytics to make better planning and decisions? Well, to start with, analytics is the use of scientific and mathematical methods to study and analysis of complex systems. So here we go back to this idea of complex system as something that we can study. And analytics provides a solution for certain kinds of questions. Now, there are different questions that we can answer with analytics. We can answer questions related to what happened in the past, analyzing past records, past information to try to see common patterns, to try to see what happened in the last few years or in the last few months in our organizations. And that's a great start. That's something that most companies are already doing. They collect data and they analyze their past performance. For example, a question that we could analyze using descriptive analytics will be, what was our most popular product last year? Well, we can count the sales, we can analyze by month, we can do all that. That's typically how companies start to analyze data. It's valuable, but not so relevant in terms of what we are talking about today, where things are changing, things are new. Well, if these things are changing, are new, well, likely those those were not the situation that we experienced even a few years back or a few months back. So what else do we have? Well, we can also analyze interrelationships, connections, find what are potential root causes to try to understand how variables or factors are related. And for example, we could understand why customers use our solution or bought our product in the last X number of months. And to do that, we have techniques like designing experiments or correlation analysis, or even something called linear regression models to try to come up with explanations of how these elements are connected with each other. That's great, but again, we're still talking about the past. We are not talking about new changes, new potential scenarios. So we need to look for other options that analytics offer in terms of techniques and projects we can do. We could move more to something that is called predictive analytics. Now we are creating models that allows us to predict what could potentially happen in the future. This is part of what is typically known as data science and machine learning. So in these fields, what we do is look at the past data and try to come up with a model that allows us to predict a new case, the future revenue, the future sales based on the past data. The challenge with that, again, it's typically techniques that are part of data science and machine learning use past data to create the predictions, to create the models that are used to estimate new cases. So it's great because now we are predicting the future, but not so great because typically these techniques rely, as the previous three ones, on past data. So what happens when you are facing a complete new scenario, a complete new case that has not been recorded ever by the organization, has not been seen by you. So what else is out there? Well, there is another part of analytics that allows us to test what if scenarios, what if situations, and see potential results of those what if scenarios. But that requires that we jump to the end of the spectrum of data analytics projects and techniques, which will be prescriptive analytics. The problem with doing that is if you see the x-axis, the axis of difficulty, we have been increasing the level of difficulty every time that we are trying to move forward in this exploration of what options we have in analytics. So definitely creating something that allows us to test what if scenarios just based on this diagram tells us that it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a lot more difficult than just analyzing the past performance of the organization or the data. It's going to be even more difficult than creating a model using data science or machine learning, which are sophisticated techniques that allows you to identify patterns in existing data to produce models. Now we are going to be dealing with other kinds of techniques that, as you will see in a few minutes, do have its technical difficulties. But on the positive side, if we look at the y-axis, by jumping between these different types of projects, we can produce a lot of value for the decision maker, because now we can test potential situations that have not occurred yet, so we can prepare for those scenarios for whatever we want to test using a couple of techniques that I will show you today to see what are potential results, potential situations that we might experience, and plan for those and be ready for those, so we are in a better position moving into the future. Okay, so what options do we have when we are talking about prescriptive analytics and this idea of testing what if scenarios, testing cases that have not occurred yet, but we see that might impact us or might impact our organizations? Well, there are different techniques and or areas that we could use for this kind of purpose. One of them is optimizations, another one, decision modeling. Today, I want to focus your attention on simulation modeling. So I'm going to tell you what techniques are part of these simulations, and I'm going to tell you at the end what sources, what tools can you use to create these models, and what interesting resources I suggest you explore if you want to start learning about simulation models. So first, what is a simulation model? It's a computerized model which possesses the characteristics described or represented by a dynamic system or phenomenon. So basically, it is having a software or a computer system where we can include all the variables that we are concerned about, where we can connect those variables, actors, elements in different ways and see the effect or the behavior of them over time. And you have, I'm sure that you already are familiar with virtual environments. For example, when companies are training a self-driving car, well, they use a simulation model to make a system that can learn from driving in those virtual environments. Well, it's basically taking this idea of creating virtual scenarios, virtual worlds for other kinds of purposes that are not necessarily AI driven. So these are challenges that we might be facing in hospitals. Well, how can we create a virtual model of our hospital so we can test different policies, different changes to how the hospital operates, and see the results of those changes over time? Well, we can also create a virtual model of a project that we are working in and test different hiring policies, different work allocation strategies, and simulate different decisions, different conditions, and see the results in terms of how long will it take for this project to complete all the tasks, or how many people will we need to add into the project so we can complete everything that was tasked on time and with the expected quality. Well, these are scenarios and environments we don't typically associate with simulation models, but that are possible to create when you know that there are certain techniques that allows you to simulate these social systems in a very efficient way. So I want to show you some of those systems and some of those approaches so you can continue your learning and know that, well, we can create models, simulation models of these more soft problems or these more business problems that we are interested in. So what are some of the alternatives we have when we want to create a simulation model? Well, there are three main types of techniques or types of simulation models that we can create. The first one is called discrete event simulations. Basically, when we are dealing with a problem that could be explained or organized as a series of steps or as a series of cues, this kind of technique is very relevant because it allows you to see how items or elements move across these different cues and these different steps. One example of using discrete event simulation for understanding the supply chain of a company and the disruptions that happen because of COVID could be developed using this kind of technique. I'm going to show you a brief example of this model that allowed a company to understand the potential disruptions that were going to happen because of plant shutdowns, disruption with contractors, and changes in customer demand that occur during COVID. And this will allow you to see some of these simulation models in action in a very user-friendly way, I would say. This is from a system that I will mention a little bit later called AnyLogic that allows you to see how the different trucks, in this case, airplanes, move across time and some of the changes that needed to occur because of the effects that happen because of COVID. Now, in terms of visually, this looks great, but what's behind it, and this is where the magic really happens. Here we can see in this environment the criteria, the decisions, the connections of the different interconnected elements that we were seeing in a more visually appealing way in 1 minute ago. So definitely creating this model, it's more challenging because now you need to define these rules, define the steps, and configure them so the system understands the elements and can run the simulation. But the advantage is that you can start testing different scenarios, different changes in routes, different potential disruptions that could be introduced because of COVID. So these are the kinds of things that we can produce using discrete event simulations. There are other types of simulations. We can also create what are called agents and give them some intuitions, some rules on how they should behave, and allow them to interact in a virtual environment. And so we can analyze their behavior and analyze the results of a system that contain these agents and see if we can create rules so they behave better or they if we can harvest the information to make better decisions down the road. An example of these kinds of agent-based models can be found again, going back to COVID, when we simulate different rules or policies that governments explore to try to combat or control the pandemic. And there is a very nice article that shows different the effects of different rules in terms of allowing people to move freely across a space versus limiting the number of contact, limiting the number of the amount of movement that we could make, and to see what are the effects in terms of the number of infected and healthy people. So here you have an example of an agent-based simulation. Basically, every circle you see represents an agent. We can give these agents different behaviors, different rules. In this case, things are simple, so they are all following a very just random walk in the space, and we can analyze how many infections occur following this model. But then we can explore other policies, like let's limit the amount of contact, or let's put some boundaries in terms of geographical areas, but with still some movement. Well, how long will it take to have everyone infected? Or we can explore limiting the amount of movement of these infected cases, but do not reduce the movement of most other people. Well, we could analyze that scenario, or we could be more strict about the movement and explore what are those the results of these policies. And then we can analyze at the high level how many people do we expect to get the disease and when, and explore if the measures that we are implementing are working or not, or how long does it take to be useful. And to finalize the techniques that I want to show you today, there is another technique that allows you to create a high-level view of the system. And at this level, the objective is to find to model primarily interconnections between decisions and elements, and to try to come up with an understanding of the general pattern that could occur in a given situation. So this one is going to become, it's a little bit more abstract and a little bit more difficult to understand the modeling technique, but it's another way we can simulate a system. In terms of the concerns that I have, well, I'm very concerned about my planning for retirement and what will happen once I'm retired. So for that reason, I have, as part of some of my work, I have created models that allows me to predict what are potential scenarios that I could experience based on interest rates, amount of money that I can save, living costs, expenditure rates, and create a model that allows me to forecast based on these macro factors. Well, what would be an ideal situation that I should go into retirement in terms of the funds and in terms of my living costs, so I can live for X amount of years comfortably during retirement. Well, this is a very, for me, very personal way of using these kinds of systems, these kinds of simulations, just to make it more relatable to some of the decisions that we are making every day. And just to highlight that these kinds of techniques can be applied to more than just business problems. They can be applied to decisions that we are making in our lives, like in this case, planning for retirement and taking in consideration important variables that likely will have an effect on someone living from X amount of funds during retirement. And in terms of the areas where these models are used, well, here you have a very long list of places where if you do a search on simulation modeling and these particular industries, you're going to find hundreds of models using these different techniques that I'm telling you about to solve different kinds of problems, to predict different kinds of scenarios. Typically, for the high-level abstraction, we will use system dynamic models. For medium and low abstraction levels, where we are trying to monitor or simulate individual items, we can use discrete event simulations or evidence-based simulations. But as you can see here, the list of industries and potential areas of application is very vast, and this is not, I would say, complete. I'm sure that in all the industries, we can find a way to articulate a problem so it has, we can develop a simulation model to analyze different policies, different decisions. Now we're starting to move into the end of the presentation. I just want to highlight some important steps and important resources that you can use. Well, producing these models does require that someone abstracts or identifies the important elements that we want to model and designs the model using most likely a simulation package. So here, the challenge is looking at a problem and having the ability to identify the connections, the important elements in the system that we want to study. It's not impossible. It does require some effort, and you can learn this skill by looking at other models, understanding the modeling process, understanding the technique. But definitely, this is a different way of creating models compared to techniques that I mentioned before, like data science, which is more extracting a model directly from the data. Here, you need someone that can reflect on the problem that you have on the systems you are in, the system you are in, and convert those insights and connections into a model that you can simulate. So that requires some technical expertise and some domain-specific knowledge about the problem that you are trying to model. So before I show you the additional resources that I prepare for you, I just want to pose the question of, now that you know that these models can be created, what are some of the problems or decisions that you would like to create or analyze using simulation models? So if you can put it in the chat, we can share. Okay, we see improving UX, UI. Yes, we could create a model that allows us to analyze how a customer would behave using a website and allow. Is my mic off?
No.
No. Okay.
Right, it's
No.
working fine.
It's working fine. Good. The impact on tariff, that's good. Definitely, as we were discussing, we can explore the effects on because of tariffs between the US and Canada. we could simulate what would be the effect of using effects of using AI using agent-based simulations. Well, we could simulate a scenario where we introduce AI into a project, and we can simulate it at different levels. We could simulate a high-level view of the project and see the effects in productivity, see the effects in reduction of staff, and add to that model the side effects of introducing the technology, maybe decreasing morale, maybe decreasing motivation from people, maybe decreasing knowledge because we fire people, and integrate all those elements into a single model and simulate if the trade-off between the productivity gain because of AI really pays off versus all the negative aspects of introducing that technology. And we can do that using system dynamics, for example. So real estate strategies, that's definitely an area where you can create a model. Again, at a high level, we could look at the amount of um, buildings and apartments that are available versus the demand, and see if there is a way that those two are balanced. And if not, well, can we add policies so we have a healthy real estate market? And for that, we could create, again, a system dynamic model, or we can explore using agent-based models to simulate what will happen to people living in a certain area if you push them out of that area because of high costs or because of the destruction of housing, and what will be the effects inside of within a system or within a city, in this case, of those changes. I see sustainable development. Definitely, sustainable development is an area that we can use simulations to analyze what will be the effect of losing certain species, of losing certain habitats, of new changes in the temperature. Well, all those factors can be modeled using the techniques that I presented today. And I see lots of these interesting ideas. Unfortunately, I won't have to review all of them. But again, the idea is start looking at places where we can create one of these virtual models that allows us to include these sources of complexity, so we can analyze different what if scenarios, what if conditions, and see the behavior uh, of those, so we can make better decisions and we can be better prepared for changes or uh, new situations. To finish, I just want to highlight a couple of tools that I'm typically using for my work. One of them is AnyLogic. As we saw in the first example, it's a very complete tool because it allows you to have a complete visual representation of the model. Behind the scenes is very technical, but it allows you to create an interface, or it allows you to create a visual representation of what is going on within the system in a way that is very easy to understand. And if you go to this link, cloud.anylogic.com/models, you're going to see around 18,000 different examples of models that people have developed using this tool. And you're going to see things related to traffic jams, to supply chain, to tracking patients with COVID, dealing with COVID, you name it. Hundreds of different categories. Very powerful tool and a very powerful visual way of representing the model. You can see trucks driving in a virtual city. You can see, as we saw, airplanes. You can see people buying things in a supermarket that is being simulated using this tool. A tool that is not so visually appealing, but it allows you to create system dynamic models in a relatively very cheap way. The tool costs around $200 if you are a student and you want to have a paid license. It has a free version if you want to start exploring system dynamic models. Um, well, Bensim is that tool that will do all those things for you. Cheap, easy to use in terms of the options you have. You do require to have some knowledge about how to create system dynamic models. At this stage, you at least are aware of this simulation technique. You will need to do some additional research to actually use the tool, but it's a very powerful tool, and it's a very affordable tool for that matter. You can also use Python to create these kinds of models, and Python has multiple libraries that we can use to create these models. You have here a list for the different kinds of models that we reviewed today. And in terms of resources, here I want to leave you with 3 books that I'm typically use to in my courses to explain how simulation models can be built using Python and different applications of those models, how you can introduce uncertainty into the planning, how can you introduce feedback loops. So here, these are great starts if you are ticked by this idea of creating a simulation model for any problem that you might be facing in your organizations or in your life. Some main takeaways. These techniques can be used to explore different sources of complexity and include them in your decision processes. Can be applied to a wide range of problems and domains. You can There are multiple libraries and tools available for you to develop these models, and you do require some technical knowledge combined with some domain-specific knowledge to produce these kinds of simulation models. But that should not be a deterrent if you are interested. You have resources that you can start exploring. And well, you now are aware of these techniques, and you can do more research, or even you can contact me and I will be happy to give you some additional ideas, some additional resources, if what I provided today was you were very interested after looking at some of the potential application areas and ideas that we discussed today. And to finalize, this was just one of we have an info session related to the programs we offer at SES. Here is the information. We are very interested in getting to know you and showing you all the programs that we have developed for you. Angus, do you want to mention anything regarding the info
No, that
sessions?
pretty much covers it. There are 2 registration links that I'm putting in the chat right now. One is for the session that's going to be at 12 p.m. The other is for the session that's going to be at 6 p.m. So for those who can't join earlier, there is one that's going to be later.
Excellent.
So
Thank
let
you,
me
Angus.
I'm just gonna, I put that one in. So I'm just gonna put that. And there will also be links as well to the programs that Alejandro is in charge of in the chat.
Thank you, Angus. And yes, as part of these programs that I'm involved, we typically work with these kinds of simulation models, and we use them to understand different problems and simulate different scenarios so we can propose better decisions for companies. And it's a very interesting area that once you know, it's really attractive because you learn how many scenarios you can come up with, and you can test all of them and see the results of the changes in real time without having to worry about the implications. It becomes like a virtual test bed that you can use to validate your assumptions and see the potential results of your decisions. So definitely it's a very interesting area that you can explore as part of the resources that I share with you today or as part of the programs we offer at SES.